Hi everyone. This is our second module, lesson number one, about cost concepts and design economics. The objective of this module is to analyze short-term alternatives when the time value of money is not a factor. We will accomplish this with three types of problems. First, in this lesson, we'll deal with the economic break-even analysis. Second, we'll discuss cost-driven design optimization and present economy studies. So, this module is divided into three parts. We will discuss cost terminologies first, and then in the next presentation, we'll discuss the general economic environment. Then we'll try to illustrate some examples solving costs in the design economics. Okay, so for cost terminology, there are a variety of costs to be considered in an engineering economic analysis. These costs differ in their frequency of occurrence, relative magnitude, and degree of impact on the study. So in this lesson, we will define a number of cost categories and illustrate how they should be treated in an engineering economic analysis. So let's start with fixed costs. Fixed costs are those unaffected by changes in activity level over a feasible range of operations for the capacity or capability available. Typical fixed costs include insurance and taxes on facilities, general management and administrative salaries, license fees, and interest costs on borrowed capital. Of course, any cost is subject to change, but fixed costs tend to remain constant over a specific range of operating conditions. When larger changes in usage of resources occur, or when plant expansion or shutdown is involved, fixed costs can be affected. On the other hand, variable costs are those associated with an operation that varies in total with the quantity of output or other measures of activity level. For example, the cost of material and labor we use to make a product or supply services are variable costs because they vary in total with the number of output units, even though the costs per unit stay the same. So that's the difference between the fixed costs and the variable costs. Uh, Meanwhile, an incremental cost or sometimes incremental revenue is the additional cost or revenue that results from increasing the output of a particular system by one or more units. Okay, so incremental cost is often associated with go no go decisions that involve limited change in output or activity level. For instance, the incremental cost per mile for driving an automobile may be $0.49, but this cost depends on considerations such as the total mileage driven during the year, mileage expected for the next major trip, or the age of the automobile. Also, it is common to read about the incremental cost of producing a barrel of oil and incremental cost to the state of educating a student. As these examples indicate, the incremental cost or revenue is often quite difficult to determine in practice. Let's take a look at this example, differentiating fixed and variable cost. So we have here a problem about a new highway. So in connection with servicing a new highway, a contractor has a choice of two sites on which to set up a asphalt mixing plant equipment. Okay, the contractor estimates that it will cost $2.75 per cubic yard mile to haul the asphalt paving material from the mixing plant to the job location. Factors relating to the two mixing sites are as follows. Production costs at each site are the same. So here are the cost factors for the contractor. So first, average hauling distance. For site A, the average hauling distance is 4 miles. For site B, the average hauling distance is a little bit shorter with 3 miles. For the monthly rental of the site A is only 2,000 per month, whereas site B is $7,000 per month. The cost to set up and remove the equipment for site A is $15,000, while on site B is $50,000. The hauling expense for site A, this is for a cubic yard mile. It is $2.75 per cubic yard mile of hauling, whereas for site B, it is 2.75 cubic yard mile of hauling expense. Site A requires or does not require a flag person, whereas in site B, uh, a flag a flag person is paid $150 per day. Okay? So the job requires 50,000 cubic yards of mixed asphalt paving material. It is estimated that 4 months or 17 weeks of 5 working days per week will be required for the job. Assuming the cost of the return trip is negligible, which is the better site? Is it site A or site B? For the selected site, how many cubic yards of paving material does the contractor have to deliver before starting to make a profit? If uh, the contractor is paid $12 per cubic yard delivered to the job location. Okay, so that's the story or the problem. So we are to find out which site is better and how many cubic yards of material does the contractor have to deliver before making a profit. Okay? It is said that the contractor is paid $12 per cubic yard delivered to the job location. Of course, the cost factors have been discussed completely in this particular problem. So let's begin comparing the costs. Okay, so in differentiating or comparing the cost factors for this problem, I have this table as shown to determine if the cost is fixed or if it's variable. Okay. So for the rent, we are sure that the rent is a fixed cost. Therefore, for site A, for 4 months, they will pay 2,000. That's a total of $8,000 for the 4 months of operation. While in site B, the contractor will pay $28,000 for the 4 months. Okay. Another fixed cost is the setup. Okay. So and removal. This is a fixed cost. For site A, it is fixed at 15,000, while in site B, it is fixed at $50,000. So for these two cost factors, it is very obvious that site B has a larger fixed cost compared to site A. Okay? But then let's take note that the extra fixed cost on site B is being traded off, okay, to reduce the variable cost of the site. So let's discuss. For the flag person, it is also a fixed cost. Okay? On site A is zero. They will not pay, or they are not required to pay for the flag person. While in site B, the contractor will pay a flag person a total of 12,750. That is $150 per day times 5 days of work times 17 weeks. Okay, so this is another fixed cost for site B. Meanwhile, uh, holding expense is a variable cost in this particular problem. So in this case, site A, which is 4 miles of distance com- compared to 3 miles of distance in site B, will have an expense of $550,000. Okay? While in site B, which is a more, uh, which is near by 1 mile, will cost for the 4 months of operation. Site B will expend 412,500. So this is a much lower variable cost for site B, trading off all of his fixed costs. Okay, so in total, site A has a total cost of $573,000, while site B is at $503,250 of total cost. So the main point in this particular problem is that when comparing, uh, when analyzing options or comparing options about costs, we should consider all costs related to the particular situation. It may be overwhelming for the contractor to see that fixed costs for site B is too high compared to site A, while its distance of 3 miles will compensate for the fixed cost compared to the 4 miles of site A. So the contractor will begin to make a profit at the point where the total revenue equals the total cost. So this is what we mean by break even. So uh, above this break even point, the contractor will begin to make profit. So total cost is equal to the total revenue. It is the point where the contractor will begin to make a profit. Again, total cost equals total revenue. So if the contractor select or use site B, which has a lower total cost compared to site A, uh, his cost is a function of its cubic yards of material delivered, right? So total cost will be $28,000 plus $50,000 plus 12,750 plus 3 times 2.75 times the cubic yards of material is equal to $12 paid to the contractor times the volume of materials delivered. So if we are going to solve for the value of x, which is the volume, we now have 24,200 cubic yards of asphalt pavement mix delivered to the job site. Therefore, by using site B, contractor will begin to make profit after delivering 24,200 cubic yards of material. So, in this particular example, we differentiate fixed and variable cost uh, in choosing between two sites. Okay. So moving forward, aside from having a fixed cost, variable cost, and incremental cost, we now define direct costs, indirect costs, and standard cost. Okay. So these three are frequently encountered cost terms that involves most of the cost elements that also fit into the previous overlapping categories of fixed and variable cost. Okay. So direct costs are costs that can be reasonably measured and allocated to a specific output or work activity. For example, the labor and material costs directly associated with a product, a service, or a construction activity are what we call direct costs. Okay, for example, the materials needed to make a repair of scissors would be a direct cost. Indirect costs, on the other hand, are costs that are difficult to allocate to a specific output or work activity. Normally, they are costs allocated through a selected formula, such as proportional to the direct labor hours, direct labor dollars, or direct material dollars to the outputs or work activities. For example, the cost of common tools, the cost of general supplies, the equipment maintenance in a plant are treated as indirect costs. Overhead consists of plant operating costs that are not direct labor or direct material costs, are uh, example of uh, indirect costs. Okay? Some examples of overhead include electricity, general repairs, property taxes, and supervision. Administrative and selling expenses are usually added to the direct cost and overhead costs to arrive at a unit selling price for a product or service. Next, standard cost. Standard costs are planned costs per unit of output that are established in advance of the actual production or service delivery. They are developed from anticipated direct labor hours, materials, or and overhead categories. Standard costs play an important role in cost control and other management functions. Some typical uses of standard costs are, let's say, estimating future manufacturing costs, measuring operating performance by comparing the actual cost to the standard unit cost, preparing bids or products or services requested by customers. We use this standard cost in preparing quotations for products and services that we offer to the customers. And lastly, standard cost is used in establishing the value of work in progress, or what we call WIP, and finished inventories. Okay, so that's direct costs, indirect costs, and standard costs. Next, terminologies. We have cash cost versus book cost. So a cost that involves payment of cash is called cash cost. Okay? It is used to distinguish from one that does not involve a cash transaction. Okay? And is reflected in the accounting system as non-cash cost or book cost. Book costs are costs that do not involve cash payments, but rather represent the recovery of past expenditures over a fixed period of time. So that's the difference between cash cost and book costs. So Next, we have sunk cost. A sunk cost is one that has occurred in the past and it it doesn't have relevance to the estimates of future costs and revenues related to a alternative course of action. So, a sunk cost is common to all alternatives. It's not part of the future cash flows and can be disregarded in an engineering economic analysis. For example, sunk costs are non-refundable cash outlays, such as earnest money on a house or money spent on a passport. Those are examples of sunk cost. The concept of sunk cost is illustrated in this particular example. Let's say that you find a motorcycle that you like and you will pay $40 for the down payment, okay, which will be applied to the $1,300 purchase price. But this $40 down payment must be forfeited if you decide not to take the motorcycle. So over the weekend, let's say you find another motorcycle that you consider equally desirable for the purchase price of 1,230. So the purpose of deciding which motorcycle to purchase, for example, that 1,300 and 1,230, the $40 sunk cost on the first motorcycle should not enter into the decision, except that it lowers the price of the motorcycle. So we should not compare 1,300 to 1,230. Well, in fact, we should compare 1,300 less $40 for the first motorcycle versus 1,230 for the second motorcycle. Uh, in summary, sunk costs are irretrievable consequences of past decisions, and therefore they are not they are irrelevant in the analysis and comparison of alternatives that affect the future. Okay. Next cost terminology is opportunity cost. An opportunity cost is incurred because of the use of limited resources, such as the opportunity to use those resources to monetary advantage in an alternative use is foregone. So, let's say consider a student who could earn, let's say, $20,000 for working during a year, but instead, this student chooses to go to school for a year and spend $5,000 for his education. The opportunity cost of going to school for that year is actually $25,000. The $5,000 cash outlay and the $20,000 for the income that has been forgone. So that is what we call opportunity cost. Next, life cycle cost. Okay. Life cycle cost refers to the summation of all the costs related to a product, structure, system, or service during its lifespan. So, a simple illustration is provided here. So, in engineering practice, this term life cycle cost is often encountered. The life cycle begins with identification of the economic need or want and ends with the retirement or disposal activities. It is the time horizon that must be defined in the context of the specific situation. So, the life cycle of a product, structure, system, or service may be divided into two general time periods, the acquisition phase and the operation phase. So, Each of these phases is further subdivided into interrelated but different activity periods. The acquisition phase uh, begins with the analysis of the economic need or want. The analysis necessary to make explicit the requirement for a product, structure, system, or service. Then, with this requirement explicitly defined, the other activity in the acquisition phase can proceed in a logical sequence. The conceptual design activities translate the defined technical and operational requirements into a preferred preliminary design. So this is the second sub phase. Included in these activities are development of a feasible alternatives, engineering economic analysis to assist in the selection of the preliminary design. Okay? So also, advanced development and prototype testing activities to support this preliminary design occur during this acquisition phase. The next group of activities in the acquisition phase involves the detailed design and the planning for the production and construction. In the operation phase, the production, delivery, or construction of the end items or service occur. This phase ends with the retirement from the active operation or use and often disposal of the physical assets involved. The priorities for engineering economy studies during the operation phase are first, achieving efficient and effective support to operations. Second, determining whether and when replacement of assets should occur. Third, projecting the timing and retirement and disposal activities. So that's another terminology, life cycle costs. Okay, so we will use these terms throughout the course. So be familiar with these costs. You may or you will encounter them in some of our lessons. So in the next part, we will discuss about the general economic environment, okay? And we'll go through some examples, solving the total revenue and the demand. So I guess that's the end of this first part, cost terminologies and the general economic environment. Right? Thank you.